What's the worst thing you can say to anybody? Podcast you, mister. That's really weird, because if I want to hurt you, I should say unpodcast you, mister. Because podcast you is really nice, man. I gotta say, it's hard to do Hoffman doing Lenny.
Could you do Lenny? I don't know that
I feel like the Hoffman thing is kind of right. I mean, this is almost the Hoffman thing.
Right.
And then the Lenny thing is a little, I feel like I'm just going into Cartoon Chipmunk there.
Yeah, I think when you're doing Lenny, you're just doing Angry Jew, right? Hoffman, that's very specific.
The Hoffman thing, but then you're trying to put Lenny onto Hoffman. It's an interesting balance. Look, we love it when our guest interjects before they're introduced.
Yeah, our guest can just weigh in. I don't know if our guest has a Hoffman or a Lenny.
Oh, I'm always ready to interject on this kind of stuff.
I saw you holding back. Yeah.
Funny you said it, because one of the biggest problems is over the years, I feel like people trying to do Lenny.
Yes.
In stand-up. And so suddenly you have these people, and I watch a lot of Lenny Bruce, and before the movie and whatever, I've listened to some old tapes over the years because, he changed the game in so many ways. But him doing it at that time, you allow for a lot of pontification, and you allow for a lot of dead air because he was changing the game.
Yes.
You weren't just watching, but once somebody does that structurally, everybody else's responsibility is joke in the middle of that structure. And so when I watch Lenny Bruce, people are like, oh, Lenny Bruce wasn't that funny. Like a lot of comedians say that. I go, but it doesn't, what he did at that time was something else. You know what I mean?
He was like the first modern comedian, and then other people figured out how to make that funnier and more entertaining.
That's right. And by the way, that Go Joe Ansys was apparently where he stole his whole style.
Sure.
That was like Rodney Dangerfield's friend and his friend. And so they all love that guy, but the guy wouldn't get on stage. So fortune favors the brave. Somebody should have said that to Joe Ansys. But yeah, so I mean, it is interesting to watch people steal that kind of style of Lenny Bruce. And it gets very didactic and it's just a little bit pompous. And, you know what I mean? It's too much sometimes. But when he did it, you have to give him a lot of slack, in my opinion,
Would you agree with my assessment? I was trying to do the math while watching this movie again last night. I feel like still, conservatively, 25% of comedians are trying to do Lenny Bruce today. And they tend to be the most self-indulgent comedians working.
He's a whole quadrant of stand-up comedy, essentially, you're saying. Like, it all goes back that way?
Kind of, right? Or they're at least doing a distillation of Lenny.
Well, everybody gets influenced by somebody in comedy. You have to be influenced by. It's like that great line in Manhattan when Woody Allen goes, "You think you're God?" He goes, "I have to model myself after somebody."
Sure.
So better Lenny Bruce than some old time. But yes, I feel like he's had undue influence, not just on comedians. Now, here's what I'd like to attack: all thinkers on comedy.
Great. Here we go.
Audience members, everybody, because not just comedians. But this idea, this romanticized idea of tortured truth teller is too much for me. Because here's the thing about comedy, in my opinion. Once again, something nobody says, in my opinion. You won't hear that on social media. Is that comedy, like doctors first do no harm, first make people laugh. So if you're not making people laugh, I don't even want to discuss. I don't care if you have the most breakthrough revelations that changed the world. Advertised as a philosopher. So when people go to see a comedy show, get the babysitter or whatever, you're supposed to elicit laughter. That's what the advertisement for a comedian is. So if you're not doing that, I don't care how brilliant you think you are, you're false advertising. You're not shocking people. You're not freaking them out. It's this whole idea of like, yeah, man, I had the bourgeoisie and an outrage with my observations. They can't handle it. These middle-class morality, suburban, and it's like, all right, that was when Lenny Bruce did it. It's shocking.
Truly, right.
1960, you took about the Catholic Church, you could have got your ass beat to death. You know what I mean? And so I'm just saying now, going after the Catholic Church, not that they don't deserve it, but don't act like I'll be on stage sometimes making some stupid Catholic Church joke, and a couple of people are like, whoa, and I'm like, yeah, I'm really stepping out on a limb. I'm going to watch myself.
You don't have someone being like, all right, into the paddy wagon with you.
Right.
Like the minute.
Exactly.
Right.
And that's the thing. It's this romanticized thing that it's like comedy is, chain smoking, tortured, get laughs. And the highest form of it, in my opinion, again, is if you can say what you're trying to say and get laughs. So I'm not saying they're on different levels, but the laughter has to be there or it's not an even discussion,
And if 25% of comedians are doing some derivation of Lenny Bruce, I think the bigger problem is 15% of comedians maybe take all of the wrong lessons from Lenny Bruce, not just in their act, but in their sort of how they view themselves and their personality and this, like, I'm this radical disruptor, I Sermon on the Mount. I need to, yes, the tortured, chain-smoking black and white. Like, when they're doing stand-up and they're bombing, they think they look like Dustin Hoffman in this movie. And someday someone is going to talk about how misunderstood they were at their time.
Right. But that's also the responsibility of the people that have commented all these years, because people love that idea of Lenny Bruce. And it's stuck as this archetype for everybody. And I love it. I mean, I get it. I'm in there. I'm like, this is cool. He's like a badass. By the way, Dustin Hoffman, Lenny Bruce, horrible.
Wow.
Dustin Hoffman is one of the most amazing actors of all time. He tried. Either you're a stand-up or you're not. You can't be not funny and be a stand-up. So Dustin Hoffman's going like this the whole movie, which is rule one of what I would never do in what I can't imagine anyone doing stand-up. He tells his joke and he goes like this and smiles at the crowd. You're Lenny Bruce. Lenny Bruce was a badass. And smiling like this, like, hey, guys, are you in? That's a guy at telling a joke at like a business conference. Like, I hope I get the laugh. Lenny Bruce, whatever his faults were, he was a sexy, kind of like, I don't care. Yeah, man. Like, and he was that guy. You know what I mean? He wasn't a guy that's up there like, hey, guys, are you in?
I appreciate you saying that because I think with this movie, you might watch it and come away with the basic take we're all talking about. Oh, well, Lenny Bruce, he wasn't that funny. And maybe the real answer is like, well, Dustin Hoffman is Lenny Bruce, isn't that funny. Lenny Bruce might have been funny, but Lenny Bruce through Dustin isn't that funny.
They said the guy that did the play, Cliff Gorman, was apparently great. Like, they had that play that it's based on. But when it came to the movie, they have to have Dustin Hoffman.
Got to get the star.
And he's the fake Lenny in the Lenny within a movie in all that jazz. That's Bob Fosse's apology for not putting him in the film. He's very good in that.
But again, even what Bob Fosse chose, because Bob Fosse's not funny. So here's the whole thing with comedy. Funny, funny, funny. If it's not funny, I don't care about the torture. It's fine. I get everybody wants to be the torture. But if I'm watching a movie about, I don't know who what was that movie? So like the Elton John movie, like Elton John, his life, it's interesting enough. But if you don't hear the songs, then you're like, why am I watching this movie about a guy that was on drugs and tortured? He's like everybody else. We all have 10 people in our lives like this. Oh yeah, I forgot. He's a great songwriter. So with every comedy movie, this is my bone to pick in comedy in general, movies and TV shows, is if you don't have jokes if you don't curate the material correctly, then I'm not watching this guy at the funniest. And it drives me nuts. So that's part of my problem is like Bob Boyce is like, the death stuff is deep. I'm like, is it really, Bob? Is it really? Is that it? Death, man. Death. It's like, okay, that was that 50s Ingmar Bergman and Woody and all of them. They would just thought that made them deep to be into death. Speaking of, archetypes, they're like, yeah, we're into like death. And it's like, it's too much.
Death as a personality. Look, we're going to dig into all of this. Dig, man. Dig. Listen, Dig. This is a podcast called Blank Check with Griffin and David. I'm Griffin.
I'm David.
It's a podcast about filmographies, directors who have massive success early on in their careers and are given a series of blank checks to make whatever crazy passion products they want. Sometimes those checks clear. Sometimes they bounce. Man. It's a miniseries on the films of Bob Fosse. It's called Pod That Jazz Cast.
That's right.
And today we're talking about the film Lenny. And we got with us not just a comedian, but clearly a historian, an expert, a truth teller, dare I say it. A modern philosopher.
Yeah, what is every euphemism for stand-up comedian also that exists? Modern philosopher,
And look, all that stuff is great. That's the highest form if you're making people laugh the whole time.
Right. So here's the main credit I'll list. Our guest today is funny.
Yeah, that's
Funny
it.
He
guy.
tells really good jokes and makes people laugh.
That's it.
Colin Quinn.
By the way, Cabaret, which did you guys do Cabaret?
We did
Yeah.
Cabaret, yeah.
So did you ever hear that great story, the interview with Joel Grey talking about Bob Fosse and how Bob Fosse wanted to play the part.
Yes.
Right.
And then he said it's either me or Joel Grey because he thought they wouldn't take Joel Grey, and they took Joel Grey. And then the first day rehearsal in Berlin, Bob Fosse did a flip. Did you see that?
Yes.
And he landed on his head in black and blue, and then he just rest of the time just and he tried to cut Joel Grey out of the whole movie.
Yeah. It's crazy.
Yeah, and that was before this movie. So I mean, obviously his judgment was they were like, "Are you crazy? Joel Grey's the great part of the movie." So and he had no choice but to cast Dustin Hoffman. This is going to be an anti-Dustin. It's going to turn into an attack on Dustin Hoffman, unfortunately.
Okay, here's what I want to say right off the bat. Because I know this is it's sort of the common complaint of this movie throughout the comedy community is just he doesn't get the sort of rhythms of being on stage correctly. It's such a sort of literal impression. He's approaching it very literally minded, and he evokes him in a lot of ways, but the dynamic of him on stage interacting with a crowd never feels correct. And the other thing is, fundamentally, he's not funny. None of these routines are funny, right?
Yeah,
I would argue Hoffman does a good job with all of the sort of offstage stuff. But like 50% of this movie is actually having to do the routines.
right.
And I had the same feeling where I was like, look, I've never found Lenny Bruce personally very funny. I understand his historical importance. I think he's worth studying for these reasons. But watching the movie, I was like, man, he's really not funny. These routines suck. And then this morning, I put on Lenny Bruce live at Carnegie Hall, and I was like, oh, no.
There's a reason this guy was well known. Yes.
Yeah, it's still not my favorite kind of thing.
It wasn't just that he got on stage and said sucker, like he was a performer of renown.
It's still self-indulgent. We've adapted, the form has evolved since then, but you listen to him and it's like he has an innate sense of comedy that perhaps is not Dustin Hoffman's strong suit.
That's exactly right.
Dustin Hoffman can be a very funny comic actor, right? Like Tootsie, I don't know, right?
But
Like
it's a different thing.
It's a whole different ballgame. And like I said, the biggest crime to me is that smile to the audience. I mean, I couldn't even believe it. You know what I mean? But the material was Bob Fosse doesn't know what he's looking at, maybe, you know what I mean? Because material-wise, yeah.
I feel like Bob Fosse himself admitted that he wasn't a fan of Lenny Bruce, didn't find him very funny, and was fascinated by, as you already called out, the looming specter of death, his number one favorite theme. Colin's body just shrugged. His entire body just sighed.
Because I don't even believe Bob Fosse's looming specter of death, judging on his behavior in his life. I believe that people at that time had a fashion where they were like, I'm into death. And everybody's like, "Ooh, this person's deep."
Yeah.
I just don't buy it. I think it's an affect.
I think he was very obsessed with the notion of what Lenny represented in terms of breaking down those walls and changing the vernacular. Because Fosse was a guy who tried to rewrite dance in that kind of way and make things sexier, more tactile, more adult, and more dangerous. But the actual comedy itself, I think by his own admission, he was never that interested in. He's really interested in Lenny as a figure in terms of what he represents.
That's right. That's what I think so too.
And the other part of it, the other thing is like that Bob Fosse grew up playing these types of clubs, that he was this child dancer doing on lineups with burlesque dancers.
Right.
The entertainer thing, the backroom entertainer thing, that seems very Fosse.
He loves the sad, dirty show people thing. He loves these terrible rooms and staying in the hotels and all that sort of shit. But then you get to the comedy of it, and he's just like, I don't know.
That's the whole thing. It's like watching a musical without the music. I mean, if you're not watching a comedian being funny, then why are you watching this person? It's every other 10th person you know.
It is funny that this movie pretty much has the exact same structure as Cabaret, where it's like you're cutting in between this one sort of performance and these slivers of the life.
But Cabaret was a masterpiece.
Yes, well, because he's really good at doing musical numbers. This is the thing about Bob Fosse that people don't talk about that much. Very good at musical numbers.
Yeah.
But that's my question to you, Colin. What's your overall Fosse feeling? Have is Cabaret that's your favorite? How do you feel about the Fosse filmography?
Well, what else was there? All That Jazz I thought was good, except the death thing was corny. But look, the beginning of All That Jazz, when it's just quiet and then the music and they're stretching, I was like, that's masterpiece.
Masterpiece. First movie, Sweet Charity, with Shirley MacLaine.
Oh, did he direct that?
He directed that. And then his last movie after All That Jazz is Star 80.
Oh, Star 80 was good. That was funny.
Yeah, Star 80 rules. But is one of the darkest movies ever made, arguably.
It's a grim one. Yeah.
By the way, how good was Eric Roberts when he quotes to Cliff Robertson? He quotes the Playboy philosophy at the party.
We're going to talk about Eric Roberts' performance of that movie is one of the few times where you feel like this is actual just evil captured on camera.
He was amazing. Yeah.
It's unbelievable.
He never really shook it. Yeah.
But so overall, you do seem to like his movies.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
I love Bob.
But I want to bring it up because, Colin, people don't know. You were secretly a major cinephile. You did a Criterion Closet video.
That's right. You've been to the closet.
Oh, yeah.
You've been to the closet. I watched this. I went, what am I doing? Let's rope Colin in here. And I thought between your bona fides as a cinephile and your expertise, your strong-minded opinions on Lenny Bruce, which when I texted you to do this, you said, Lenny Bruce looks like an open micer compared to me. That was your immediate response.
I'd like to be, that's my persona. But yeah, Lenny Bruce was, no, of course, Lenny Bruce, like what you said, he changed the form. That's hard. He changed the form. And he didn't do it because it didn't need it. Like you could change the form when it doesn't need it to, but it needed it. And he changed it. And it was really interesting, And I still say it's so funny because even among comedians when we talk, there's nothing, one-liner people are so funny. Like you watch Rodney Dangerfield, some of these one-liners have more truth in them than somebody rambling for 20 minutes. And jokes are some of the funniest jokes ever. Jokes, but
100%.
Yeah, pound for pound, Dangerfield, in my opinion, is the funniest person to ever do it. You just watch it every 15 seconds, something funny.
Well, he didn't write those, most of them, but I mean,
no, I know. I'm just giving credit as a performer, as a brand, as a construction. Just funny.
Well, funny is because what he was saying and what he looked like and what he sounded like all were perfectly consistent.
Correct. Yes.
You're like, and the other outside thing is you're like, nobody really gets respect. So even though you're laughing at him for not getting respect, you don't feel like you get respect either. So it sort of keeps you in there.
There's a universality to it that he figured out. Right.
And he was probably pound for pound the most, consistently where he'd just show up and you'd be like, oh, I remember seeing Caddyshack. And at that time, Dangerfield was like an old fashioned type comic.
Yeah.
And we're like, he's with Bill Murray, all these guys. What great thing about Caddyshack, which you always might want to do that movie someday. Caddyshack have all these hip guys that we loved, like Bill Murray and, Chevy Chase, and we're all stoned and smoking pot. There's all these references in the movie. Saturday Night Live's like was the hippies. And in the middle of it, Rodney Dangerfield comes on, which we loved him because he was so funny. Ted Knight, who's this lame sitcom guy from Too Close for Comfort, comes on and steals the movie.
Yes.
I remember that gave me a great lesson when I saw that. I go, this guy's I didn't even want to say it. I go, what's this guy in the moon in the movie? He stole the movie. He was so good.
It's one of those things. I think that's a movie where, when I saw it when I was young, I didn't get Ted Knight's performance. And then the older I get, every time I rewatch that movie, you go, this is the most interesting thing happening in the movie.
It is. He's incredible.
By the way, do you ever, this would relate to Lenny Bruce and a lot of the movies. There was that scene with Chevy Chase and Bill Murray that they just left in because they wanted to see with those two, where he's golfing through and they talk about, you come by my house.
An inexplicable scene. It's the middle of the night. Chevy Chase is like, oh, I'm golfing. Like, it doesn't make any sense. Right, yes.
But nowadays, they would say, cut that scene. It's not pushing the plot forward. It's not moving. And that's the kind of scene that I feel like every movie strives for in some way. Just these people being in a moment. And you know what I mean? I thought it was such a beautiful scene.
I rewatched Caddyshack recently because I had not seen it since I was like a kid or whatever. And that movie is almost abstract. It is very strange. It is weird that it became such a phenomenon. It doesn't have a plot. And it's ostensibly about these young guys, but then the young guys are sort of irrelevant to it. It's so strange. Yeah.
No, but I think when they shot it, there was a much more conventional script that was like breaking away, that was really about the Michael O'Keefe character. And sometimes you had these fringe characters. And then that's a movie where they got so much good shit with the four elder
random
statesmen
improvisers. Yeah, exactly.
That they were like,
right.
Cut Michael O'Keefe down to 20 minutes. Let's hit the basics of that plot. And it's just a hangout movie.
But that they released it and it worked is just audacious. Yeah.
Totally worked.
Yes.
But and I'll tell you who was good, speaking of side characters, Valerie Perrine in Lenny, I'm saying.
Oh.
Speaking of other people, she was amazing.
Yes.
Did she win the Academy Award? I don't know.
She was nominated.
She won Best Actress at Cannes.
It was an impossible part because she had to live up to not only Lenny's expectations, but Bob Fosse. She represented everything Bob Fosse's obsessed with his whole life other than death. And she was that good where you're like, every scene, you're like, yes. And I like the guy that played Milton Berle. Remember him? He's like,
yes,
putting his hand on her leg. It was good.
She lost Griffin to Ellen Burstyn for Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore, which is
okay.
And it's a great year. It's Faye Dunaway for Chinatown, Gina Rowlands for Woman Under the Influence, and Diane Carroll for Claudine. It's like, but the thing is, she was nominated in lead, which she shouldn't. This is a supporting performance. She's not in a lot of the movie. And she won a lot of critics awards in supporting. And she might have won there, but she was run as lead.
But she's functioning like the narrator for a lot of the movie. I know she spends the middle chunk in jail.
I know, she just doesn't have a lot of screen time.
Sure. This is a question I want to ask you, Colin. Is there a performance of an actor playing a stand-up that you think gets it right? Or do you think it's fundamentally a thing that someone who doesn't have experience doing stand-up never gets that sort of dynamic, that energy, correct, for at least the performance sequences?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it just goes to show like how everybody probably feels that way at their job. So whenever they see like, that guy wasn't a soldier, that guy wasn't a cop, she wasn't a hooker, like whatever your job is, you're like, they can't fill the bed, and they can't do it.
Right.
Even in those chick flicks, when they're like, my presentation, they're like, oh, she didn't work in a woman's magazine. You know what I mean? Like, nobody gets it right. So I guess I've never seen, I can't even think of that many, but I've never seen, I feel like it's also that relationship with the audience. Like, he tried to do the audience thing,
right.
Bob Fosse. But it's like, what would you do with an audience? I once listened to an old Lenny Bruce tape from the 1950s that this guy Hal had, and it was him yelling at this table and going, man, you people, why do they always seat you right there? And I was just laughing because it never changes. And he goes, and after the show, you're going to go, we were helping you. And I was like, even Lenny Bruce had to deal with like the cliche people going, we were helping you after the show.
Yeah.
By heckling, by talking. So I was like, it would be interesting to see somebody really get the essence of the audience, in a comedy show, but so far I feel like that's a big part of it. It's almost like in between the audience and the comedian, like almost that whatever's in between those two. How would you capture that? It's strange.
It's hard. And I think even if the performer gets it right, there's something about when you're staging stand-up, when you've hired people to be the audience, when they have to watch the performance many times. Like, it's a thing that I think, to his credit, Apatow was smart about in Funny People, which is just send these people out to real clubs, put a camera in the back, don't make the same crowd sit through the same routine multiple times, just go to another club on another night, get a different audience, and mostly casting actors who had some background in stand-up.
Oh, yeah. Well, most of the people doing stand-up were stand-ups, too, which is also the smart move. You got to so you throw them out there. They're going to be out there getting that competitive streak. Like, I know I'm in a movie, but I'm going to get laughs from this crowd, too. Screw this. You know what I mean?
The Sandler scenes in particular, I think, have that energy that, like, you can't capture. It's just, it's not the same thing. When to your point about the smiling thing, right? When Norm Macdonald died, I showed my father his roast, the Bob Saget roast set, right? Which for my money is one of the greatest stand-up performances ever.
It's incredible.
And my dad had never seen it. And I showed it to him. And I was trying to explain to him the context of it, right?
Yeah.
And I
It's
said,
hard to actually set it up as like, you don't understand, the roast works like this, he's doing something, like all of that stuff. Right. Yeah.
And my dad watches the other roast. So I said, just imagine, before this is Lisa Lampanelli, just like hitting like three-pointers from half court, right? Like everyone else is going so hard, so dirty, so mean. And he comes up. And the other thing I said was, look, when they put this on Comedy Central, they re-edited it. They added in crowd reaction shots to make it seem like he was killing it. This is the unedited footage. And I showed it to my dad, and he just turned to me halfway through. I was trying to explain to him because he was never really a Norm guy, like why Norm was important. And he turned to me and he went, this guy just didn't give a shit, huh? And I went, yeah, exactly. And he went, like, that's fearless to get up there and tell jokes that corny when everyone else has been. And you just watch his face, and he just isn't affected at all by the fact that he's playing to abject silence.
No, he knew it.
Right, and it's that thing, especially when Lenny Bruce was like fucking rewriting the form with his bare hands.
Right.
He wasn't getting out there on stage looking for approval, which is that thing. It's the actor insecurity, please love me thing that I think Hoffman has to. That's how he relates to the idea of being a performer.
100%. And I'm sure he gets that. Right. Yeah, that seems so inherent to Hoffman's. Yes.
He can't think of not wanting to win their approval in that moment.
And I'm sure Lenny Bruce wanted laughs the whole time. Lenny Bruce never went out there to not get laughs. But like you said, it's the way of being like, okay, this is where I draw the line. You guys got to meet me halfway. I'm not crawling. You know what I mean? Or else it's not funny. The worst thing in stand-up, the guaranteed bomb, is anyone that goes out there needy. Anybody that goes out there and wants so badly for the audience to laugh, they withdraw. It's like trying to, get somebody attracted to you. If you go in like this, they're like, get away from me. There has to be a little bit of, yourself in there. Like, hey, I'm drawing my boundary too, And I think that's what that was missing. But I don't want to put it all on him because a lot of it was, our favorite director, Bob Fosse. You know what I mean?
Yeah, let's dig into how this movie got made. Yeah. Ding dong.
Oh no. Whoa, there's someone at the door.
Someone at the door.
Okay. In a Zoom episode.
It's in your apartment.
Okay.
It's not in my room.
Hello?
Hello?
Who's this?
The Riddler.
Oh, the Riddler.
It's me, the Riddler.
I guess we've been recently talking about
Popping
you.
over from the Patreon feed.
Sure, you're very intense. What's up?
Sometimes I talk very quiet.
Uh-huh.
Sometimes I'm yelling.
Just what a podcast producer wants to hear.
I'm in your apartment, David.
Uh-huh.
Clear glasses.
Okay.
Even the frames are clear.
Right.
And I have a riddle for you.
Uh-huh.
A riddle I believe you can never solve.
You're sure you're right. What is it?
What would you do if your business had to hire great people fast?
Can I have a hint?
Yeah, here's a hint.
Uh-huh.
You need Indeed.
Oh, here's my answer. Indeed, the hiring platform where you can attract, interview, and hire all in one place. I think your hint was a little too obvious.
It's a little bit more of an answer.
Right. It really was just the answer.
Yeah.
Because instead of spending hours on multiple job sites searching for candidates with the right skills, and Indeed, I have a powerful hiring partner that can help me do it all.
Yeah, I gave you the full answer in the hint there.
Right. I mean, like, for example, if I was trying to hire a great Riddler, I could find that talent faster using time-saving tools like instant match assessments and virtual interviews.
I just gave the hint to all 13 of my followers. This is going to go viral now.
With Instant Match Riddler, and I don't know your real name, over 80% of employers get quality candidates whose resume on Indeed matches their job description the moment they sponsor a job.
You don't know my name?
According to Indeed Data US, no, I don't.
Edward Nigma.
Okay, that's cool. Well, now I know your name.
I shouldn't have told you that. I should have made it a riddle.
You probably should. You're really bad at this.
God, I haven't been sleeping well.
I also want to point out to you that actually the copy we're reading from says that it's more of a puzzle than a riddle.
Oh, I'm sorry. So now you wish the puzzler had walked into your apartment
I'm
and
just
done an
pointing
ad
out
read?
there is a puzzler, isn't there?
You know, I'm trying my hardest to overcome.
You are, and I don't want to make
The
you mad.
city is collapsing.
That is, sort of true. All right, you be quiet. Indeed's the only job site where you only pay for applications that meet your must-have requirements. It's an unbelievably powerful hiring partner. It delivers 4 times more hires than any other job site combined, according to Talent Nest in 2019. 3 million businesses worldwide use Indeed to hire great talent fast.
I feel like I need to prove myself to you. Can I grab that coffee for a second?
Sure, here you go. Ooh, that's a very good question, Mark Riddler.
God, I was hoping you wouldn't know what it was.
What is this symbol? Indeed is doing something no other job site has done. Now with Indeed, businesses only pay for quality applications matching the sponsored job description. So visit Indeed.com/check to start hiring now. Just go to Indeed.com/check. Indeed.com/check. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire. You need Indeed.
Ave Maria.
Get him out of here. So this movie obviously is coming right after. Bob Fosse is just the most enormous success. He wins Best Director for Cabaret at the Oscars. He wins Best Director at the Tonys for Pippin. And he wins Best Director at the Emmys for Liza with a Z, all in the same year.
Yeah, he's the first and still only person to essentially get the directing Triple Crown.
Right, in 1 year.
In the same year. Yeah.
And his reaction, which seems very Bob Fosse, is to enter a state of massive depression.
Right.
Which, that makes that tracks with his entire sort of creative process, basically.
But he was also, I only know because probably a few years later, and I was a lot younger, I used to eat massive amounts of speed and chain smoke. And believe me, when you're not on the crest of it, you're in a depression.
Sure.
Right. I mean, that makes sense. He's so high-low. Yeah. Anne Ranking, who's his girlfriend, obviously, we'll talk about her more and all that jazz. But she brings up this Looney Tunes cartoon called Showbiz Bugs, where Daffy and Bugs Bunny are in competing acts. The audience loves Bugs. Daffy keeps trying to outdo him and he can't. And Daffy figures out the only way he can do it is to blow himself up. And the audience goes wild. Bugs loves it and claps. Daffy, his ghost floating up, says, I know, but I can only do it once. And Anne Ranking is like, that's Bob Fosse.
Wow.
She saw this cartoon. I just had to read that quote. It's so good.
Yeah.
That's a good quote.
Yeah. And it's one of those things. I mean, there's sort of the whole episode of Fosse Verdon, the series, which I highly recommend if people aren't watching it or haven't watched it before this. There's the episode that's all about this insane year for him that ends with him in a mental health clinic. Like he's just had a complete psychotic break. And it is that thing. Yes, obviously aided by living a fast lifestyle, taking speed, chain smoking, all his vices and whatever. But I think for a guy like that, when you start elevating to higher and higher highs, it only creates a greater distance you can fall.
Well, then a guy like that, anybody.
Yes, absolutely.
Any athlete, any star high school athlete, and then in college you're on a bench and everybody else goes on, it rocks your world,
And I think Lenny Bruce was so, I said Lenny Bruce, Bob Fosse, but I think similarities here, what he's sort of relating to. Bob Fosse was so self-hating and always felt so unworthy of love and was constantly chasing love in all areas, but never actually feeling loved.
But wait a minute. Name the percentage of people that don't, that does not describe.
Oh,
The whole world. I'm saying welcome to that's what I'm saying. Welcome to the world, Bob.
Absolutely. But I think when you have a year where everyone's fucking lauding you as a genius, his reaction to that is, you fucking phonies, you pieces of shit. I'm a phony. I'm a piece of shit,
I don't know. I mean, I don't know if I buy that.
His reaction to this is he checks into rehab. He doesn't like it. He says he didn't like lithium because it killed his sex drive. And he said, I knew it was time to check out when I started putting on shows for the other inmates. So then he comes out. He's got 3 things going, Griff.
Mm-hmm.
He's got The Little Prince, which is sort of this passion project that Stanley Donen is working on. You love that book, right, Griffin? That's a big thing for you, The Little Prince, the children's book.
Yeah, so he's in that movie as an actor. He plays the snake. Was he at one point supposed to direct it or produce it or something?
Well, he choreographed that sequence, I believe.
Sure.
And Donen at one point gave over a lot of control to him for that. But I guess that's all he works on. Yeah.
Have you ever seen that movie, Colin? It's incredibly bizarre. It's a Lerner and Loeb Little Prince adaptation that Stanley Donen did in the 70s with Bob Fosse and Gene Wilder. It's and a child in the middle of the desert. I love it, but it's bizarre. And there's like 10 minutes of the movie that Fosse just takes over, and it becomes Fosse in head to toe black leather in the desert, seducing a child, playing like the snake in the Garden of Eden.
Oh, and Bob Fosse plays the part.
Bob Fosse plays the part. It's incredibly bizarre.
The other thing, obviously, is Chicago, which they're trying to turn into a movie. Doesn't happen. They intend that to be Gwen Verdon's return to Broadway, I guess. Like, I guess they want to do it on stage. You know, whatever. That's all going on. And then Lenny,
because they bought the rights to the original film and play, and right.
There's this whole thing, right, where they're fighting for the rights for it. Anyway, and then Lenny had been on Broadway. Cliff Gorman, as we mentioned, he wins the Tony for the stage play, and he basically sees this play and is like, I can do this as a little movie, and no one will, people will not be on my back about it, right? Like. Mm-hmm. He rather than try and cash in the big check post Cabaret, he's like, well, I can absolutely understand how this would work as a movie, and like, I'm just gonna do it. I'm just gonna do it as a very small movie, and I guess that makes sense. But it does seem, like you say, it does seem weird that like he's not that transfixed by Lenny Bruce.
No,
like we're saying, like he's more just interested in like. The intimacy of it and the shock of it, I guess. Like, I don't think he's not a comedy guy, Bob Fosse. Like, right? He has no interest in that world.
But as we found out in Fosse Verdon, his best friends, Neil Simon and Patty Chayefsky.
Yes.
Right.
It is my favorite thing about that show is that Patty Chayefsky is like LeBron James in Trainwreck. That it's like, what if your best friend in this romantic comedy saying like, you're fucking it up, Bobby?
Oh, I love that. That was the reference.
As he's researching Lenny Bruce, he's reading all these interviews with him, and he has the idea of like, okay, that can be the format of the movie, right? It's basically question and answer, trying to dig into like who was the real guy, this sort of Rashomon approach, talking to different people who knew him. The movie is written by Julian Barry, who,
wrote the play,
play and, all that. And they bring in Dustin Hoffman because Fosse wants Cliff Gorman, but the studio is like, absolutely not. The studio's United Artists, I think. And they're like, you need a movie star. Pacino was actually Fosse's second choice.
Okay.
But he turned it down. And Hoffman is the third choice, and Fosse negs him throughout. Basically, Fosse the whole time is like, look, you weren't my pick. Sorry. I hope you'll be okay. But like, they do not have a good relationship on set at all. And interesting. At one point, Hoffman told Fosse he'd worked out a walk for his version of Lenny Bruce. And Fosse replied, I wish you wouldn't do that. The last 5 performances of yours degenerated into a walk, which is a weirdly specific burn where I guess he's saying like too much of that bullshit from you. Where is Hoffman? Because like, obviously The Graduate and Midnight Cowboy, that's the late 60s, but like I guess since then he's done like
Little Big
Straw
Man.
Dogs, Little Big Man, Papillon, like not quite as big movies.
Well, and then it's 15 years later, but Rain Man is absolutely a performance that is walk forward.
Well, that's a good thing about Dustin Hoffman. He's like, I don't give a shit what he said. I'm still doing my thing. I'm doing my walk.
Right.
But of course, a guy that's his whole thing is dance, he's going to notice your walk.
Yes.
Yeah. Because I feel like right after this, then it's the real Hoffman run, of All the President's Men, Marathon Man, Straight Time, Kramer versus Kramer, Tootsie. Like, it's all his, dominant late 70s, early 80s stuff. Like, he slows it way down in the 80s.
Right. Kramer versus Kramer, 79. He wins the Oscar. Then Tootsie is 3 years later. Then Ishtar is 5 years later. And then he wins the second Oscar for Rain Man. Like his 80s are very bizarre.
But I think there was that thing with him post-Graduate where he was strategically picking roles to zag as far away from Graduate as possible. I think he has talked about this, that he like really didn't want Benjamin Braddock to be his movie star persona. So
Right.
it's like, let's just blow it up every time. Like, what are the genres you wouldn't expect to see me in? Ratso Rizzo was like a real statement of intent, you know? I think Straw Dogs was like, he was trying to go to darker places. He was trying to be edgier. He was trying to work with more provocative filmmakers.
What I love him. I mean, he's amazing, but I do think that that he was a guy that I admire all those kind of guys that you just couldn't see as movie stars, and suddenly they were the movie stars when I was a kid. You know, like they were just these all smaller guys and kind of, you know, they just blew it up. I mean, him and Al Pacino and De Niro even. De Niro wasn't like some handsome guy. He was a weird looking guy for a movie guy, you know, and they all became big stars, you know.
Colin, did you see Lenny in theaters? Like, is that? I mean, you would have been what, like a teenager or something, right?
No,
like,
I would have been.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I was still a little young for that. But I
74?
mean,
Yeah.
but I mean, no, I wish I had seen it. It sounds like that was the one to really judge everything by, you know, like material wise.
Yeah. It's also the thing of like, not only did these guys become unconventional movie stars, but Hollywood was in such a state of upheaval that like anything they wanted to do would get greenlit, regardless of how risky it seemed, because they didn't know exactly what the audience wanted. Like they were chasing a very amorphous younger audience. So this weird reality of like, if Dustin Hoffman wants to do a Lenny Bruce biopic, it's a go picture. It's as easily greenlit as any fucking action movie The Rock wants to make. Obviously, at a smaller
Right.
budget.
It's a cheap
but
movie,
the fact
right? Yeah,
that this movie ends with his dead body on a floor, like the fact that the whole movie is living in like the slums of this guy's depression, doesn't matter. They're like, Hoffman, anyone will go see anything he does.
But that's his, yeah. Plus, there were so many future options in those days. But here's the problem: if I go to see a movie about a comedian and I'm not laughing throughout the whole movie, that's a tone. Like I said, that's the narrative, the romanticized thing everybody wants now. Comedy. It's really dark behind the lights. It's as dark as sanitation department. It's as dark as electrical engineers. You understand? It's all the same. There's not some, you know what I mean? This is ridiculous. It's been driving me crazy my whole career.
No, but
they're like,
Colin, don't you
"Ooh."
understand? They make us laugh, and yet they are sad. You know, the duality there. It's just so incredible.
Believe me, I understand. I understand as well as everybody else what the thing is, the dichotomy between on stage and off stage, and how you feel a certain. But again, once again, every job that you don't think nurses go, nobody cares when I feel pain. I'm working all the time on pain. That's just life, you know. It's too much. But people it thrills everybody, you know. Whoa, you know.
Just because this isn't a visual medium, people are only going to get to hear the audio of this. I just want to say Colin is expertly leaning into the camera as punctuation on the Zoom to hit your punchlines on jokes.
Yes. Yeah, and that's the key. The key is what you said before. The real key to comedy, yes, material, all that, your mind, what your angle is. But what you said about Norm Macdonald is the key. If you really care that much, it's not funny. And why Norm was so funny was because he wanted laughs, he worked hard, but at a certain level, you're like, that's as far as I can go. I don't give a shit that much where I'm going to have this be dictated, you know? And
I think, I mean, I just watched the documentary that Apatow did for HBO, but like Carlin really, it feels like, took everything that Lenny Bruce set up and figured out how to add more jokes into it while still trying to speak to profound truths and challenge authority, you know? But it's like there were actual jokes there. Like he was a comedian first and foremost.
a comedian, yeah. And Lenny Bruce, like you said, will never, like Live at Carnegie was different. He was still indulgent, but in those days, the indulgence was almost part of the journey that people wanted to see, because it's like, how did you move from punchline one-liners to this? So I bet it was a different journey in those days to watch as an audience too, you know.
Just to hear someone slow it down that much seemed radical, because every other guy is just doing one-liner.
So you almost want to watch that journey. Like, to us now, it's indulgent, it's shorthand. But back then, maybe that was part of it. I don't know.
All right, Valerie Perrine, she's in this movie. Raquel Welch apparently was considered for this role. Jill Robinson, names I don't know. Joey Heatherton, Janice Lind. She seems like kind of a wild person. At one point, she shaved her pubic hair into a heart in preparation for the stripping sequence, called Fosse into the dressing room and said, "I have a heart on for you." Stuff like that.
Okay.
A lot of stories like that in these of wild behavior. We talked about Jan Miner, who plays Fosse, Lenny's mom. Sally Marr, the real Sally Marr, wanted to play the role herself.
Oh, wow.
Fosse thought about it because he's like, she's so unique that it would be obviously amazing to capture it, but he said he thought it would feel like weird and cheap, especially since Lenny Bruce was dead. Like, he didn't want to and then Sherman Hart is basically playing a Milton Berle type, right?
Yes.
Then they start reading the screenplay, and Fosse's like, "This thing sucks. It's going to be a disaster." And they then pivot to the interview type thing to present the movie, and that is, according to Fosse, what saved the movie. But Dustin Hoffman hates it. Like I don't know. Are there stories of Dustin Hoffman being chill and nice on set, though? Like,
No.
I feel like he's always supposed to be the prickliest guy of all, right? Like,
But in this case, he's probably right. He was right. It was a bad screenplay.
Well, but the other problem is, it's like, I think Fosse's creating that superstructure of the interviews to compensate for the fact that the Hoffman doing stand-up is not compelling enough to carry the movie.
yeah.
But again, they should have, they didn't do that in those days. Like, bring a stand-up in and try to
Sure.
explain. And again, the material, nobody could have killed with that material either. Some of it was funny, actually, at the beginning. But it was just, I don't know. And by the way, Milton Berle paid for the funeral. Even though the play abused him, they didn't say that he paid for Lenny's funeral.
Yeah, he paid to put him in the ground, yes, according
to sources.
Dustin Hoffman was the Edward Norton of his time, where the story was always, he comes in, he has opinion on fucking everything.
Right.
He wants to take on every role. And the stories are always, look, he's right most of the time, but
Right,
do
it's not
you
like he's
really want to
stupid.
deal with
Right.
it? Right. I mean, I think I can say this now because he is dead, but Dustin Hoffman weirdly, very badly wanted to play the Frank Langella role in Draft Day. And
Well,
Ivan
neither of those
Reitman
people
said,
are dead. Oh, Ivan Reitman is dead. Okay, yes.
Ivan Reitman. No, I know,
Right,
I know
yeah,
who's
yeah,
dead
right.
and who's alive, David.
Sorry. Go ahead.
I keep tabs. Ivan Reitman said life is too short to work with Dustin Hoffman. Which,
Right.
when you're offered fucking Dustin Hoffman to play the fourth lead of your sports management comedy, most people would do anything they could to get him to plus up those scenes. And he just went, literally, I don't have the energy to have these fights with him. Even if he's right, I don't have the energy.
Had he ever worked with Dustin Hoffman? I guess he never did. No,
I don't
never
think
did.
he
At least he didn't
had, and
direct
certainly no. And fucking Reitman worked with Redford and Murray and all these incredibly difficult, leading men. And he just went, I'm too old. I don't give a shit. I don't want to get into these fights with him.
Well, apparently what Hoffman is doing, unsurprisingly, he goes out to LA. He starts exploring, performing stand-up, things like that. He keeps calling Bob with ideas. He found out that apparently Lenny Bruce at one point had advertised a show by getting a cutout of Hitler and putting it on the side of the freeway and then having just it say Lenny Bruce, opening on that, which again,
Sure.
it sounds so corny now, but back then I'm sure was crazy. And
It's crazy now.
Right. And so Hoffman's calling up Fosse being like, we got to do that. We got to put that in. Right. And Fosse's like, no, I'm not, I'm doing, it's resistant to Hoffman's notes, I guess. Hoffman says this guy is not a collaborator. But, I'm sure Bob Fosse's, a side of it is essentially I'm trying to make my movie over here. I'm, whatever your idea of Lenny Bruce is, you go direct a Lenny Bruce movie. I'm the director. That seems to be.
But somebody idiotically putting a Hitler thing on the side of a freeway, only a comedian would come up with that. That's such a stupid idea. So they should have done it because Bob Fosse wants it to be this dignified thing of Lenny and his deep thought. But only a comedian would think of a shitty idea like, let's put a Hitler thing and do it. So I'm saying, Bob Fosse should have done something in that spirit.
This is the thing. I think Fosse could have allowed for Lenny to be a little sillier in this movie. And Bob Fosse is clearly like, no, this was a tortured, drug-addicted genius who stood up against hypocrisy and stood up for free speech, and that's what I want to make a movie about. And I'm watching it, and I come away with the impression of, yeah, this guy was a drug-addicted, very smart guy who stood up for free speech, and he, but I'm not coming away with the impression of like, God, I can tell why this guy changed comedy, or even like why this guy liked comedy. He mostly just seems annoying. Like, I'm sorry. Like when he's like being a pain to the judge, I'm like, can you at least be a funny pain to the judge?
Exactly. And I bet he was funny to that judge.
But I'll say this too, and I think this memory is probably in my head from Hoffman's Inside the Actor Studio. But I feel like anytime I have heard him talk about this film, his preparation for this film, his work on this film, he talks about it the way that now people describe playing the Joker. Like, he talked about it as like, I locked myself in a room and I wrote down every routine. I put them on note cards and I smoked obsessively. I tried to get into his head. This performative thing that now every actor has to do where they're like, I had to write down murderous things in a notebook until I started laughing. And then I became the Joker, America's greatest dramatic figure. And it's like, he was also so attracted to the self-tortured aspects of this guy. Both of them, I think, were primarily into this idea of what Lenny Bruce represented rather than what he actually kind of was as an artist. His basic art, which was trying to make people laugh, drunk people laugh in nightclubs. And it's funny also that this film comes so pretty soon after he's dead. I mean, it's like the timeline between him dying, the play running on Broadway, this movie, all happens in less than 10 years.
Yeah,
right.
He died in 1966. So this movie is, 8 years later? Yeah.
Yeah, like there's not a ton of distance of perspective.
Well, it's also crazy that this movie was a wide studio release, and like 10 years earlier, he was getting arrested for saying, fuck or whatever. That's just what's crazy about the 60s. Like, that it all happened so quickly.
Let's say this. The other of these romanticized narratives is that Lenny Bruce was getting arrested in 10 years earlier. He got arrested like once or twice. The rest of the time, he was beloved by the nation. He was the biggest star in comedy. Nobody's like, oh my God, he was shunned. He took a million chances and he deserved all his success. But he was successful, He wasn't successful after he died. He was successful while he was alive. Yeah. And he deserved it. He changed the game.
Like when you think of someone like Bill Hicks, right? Like a sort of similar, like truth teller, gone too soon type comedian. Like he was never like that famous, right? Like he never was a guy who was playing Carnegie Hall or whatever, or was he?
No, he was not. He was actually starting to blow up in England at the time when he died, when he got very sick, Bill. So he probably, who knows? But but Bill Hicks was right. He was never as big as that. No, he wore clubs.
Right. Whereas Lenny Bruce like climbed the mountain of comedy.
And Bill Hicks and Lenny Bruce, the other thing they had in common, which is nobody talks about their early stuff, which was really funny jokes too. So like they didn't come at it from a point of view like, I'm going to be a truth teller. They started a certain way. They were very successful. Bill Hicks very successful as a club comic when he was 16, 17. And then they decided to push it further on, They got a little older and they got restless,
Not to keep relating everything back to the George Carlin documentary, but just because I watched 5 hours of that recently, so I was really thinking about his whole career arc. But it's such a key piece to him that like he spent 10 years being a very conventional comedian. He learned how to do funny voices. He learned how to have stage presence, and like what he was doing was more traditional, but it was still funny. He wasn't hacky. And then he got to a point where he said, I want to actually find a way to represent what I think and tackle more complicated subjects. But he was fitting that into a basic fundamental understanding of how to make people laugh. He understood rhythms. He understood energy. He understood wording and construction and all of that shit. Whereas a lot of when you see, I think, the worst open micers, They are people who are just getting to, I'm going to say shit you're not supposed to say. And then when people don't laugh at it, it's what you said, where they go, well, I was too extreme for them. They didn't laugh because I was too hot for this fucking room.
Oh yeah, no, there's a lot of that, and yeah, no, exactly. You have to, like I said. I mean, it still comes down to laughs. If you're in a comedy club and you're not laughing, unless that person really is revealing the great truths that nobody in life has figured out yet, you're like, what am I doing? You're like, I'm not going to come back here. You know what I mean? It's your long-winded, drunken friend at a party. You know.
Lenny Bruce had the benefit in the 1950s and 60s, and not to diminish what he did, that like no one was getting on stage into a microphone in front of a crowd and going like, hey, people have sex. So that in and of itself was shocking. That was truly a thing that had not been verbalized in that kind of sphere before.
Yes, people would make like everything was an innuendo, and it was. Although there was some truth to it, because else people wouldn't have laughed at those people one-liners. Like they're laughing at mother-in-law jokes because people's mother-in-laws live with them, and everybody's wedged it together. And the mother-in-law was judging them a little bit because she hadn't judged her husband, and now it's the 1950s. She's like, this son of a bitch. I see what they're doing now. I didn't see it when I was young. So, I mean, it was all true stuff that was funny, but Lenny Bruce is like, I'm telling you the thoughts in my mind that we don't talk about, which is.
And when he's starting out as evolving into that stage as a stand-up, sitcoms are still showing married couples in separate beds. There's this thing where it's like, well, we all know this doesn't represent reality, but we
just don't want to talk about it. Right.
We don't want to talk about it. So merely saying the thing, as you said, was like, well, you're verbalizing something that hasn't been said before. That alone is going to give you a lot of juice.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And he, I mean, he did. There was a lot. I bet. Once again, it's hindsight is 2020, but I always think like if only Bob Fosse had known enough to really interview all the comedians that were anti-Lenny Bruce, I'm sure to that day they were still like that, and somehow wedged them in the movie saying, here's what I think. Then you would have seen like what Lenny Bruce faced. I mean, a lot of comedians loved him, but a lot of comedians didn't like, they were like, that's not entertaining. Like they hinted with Milton Berle, but it's like that fake, that facade that he did crash through, it's interesting.
I had the realization watching this. I was watching it with the woman I'm dating, and during one of the more sort of self-indulgent runs he has, and especially with Hoffman trying to overplay the drama in these things. I think that's another thing is like in all the stand-up performance scenes, Hoffman is so into playing the self-tortured aspect of it that's smothering the comedy a little bit, even though I think Fosse is selecting least funny stretches of his material. But I said to her at one point, I went, this is really just that Twitter thread that you roll your eyes at now. Like every one of these routines that they show in the movie is like Matty Iglesias going, let me try to explain something to you. And then in brackets, it says 1 out of 27. And you go, holy fucking shit. What is this? What is this fucking guy? Hey, dig this. I'm going to tell you how these things fucking work. And you're like, okay, mute,
It is interesting to see the crowds in this movie, the audiences, and to imagine that at least, right? Like what like a 1950s comedy concert goer would have been like, right? Like someone born in the turn of the century who's like, all right, what's this guy gonna say? And he's getting up there and he's being like, men and women, they have sex with each other. And that's what I kept trying to put my head in, like in that space, in like what was the crowd back then?
It is in many ways the most traditionally biopic-y scene in this movie. And this is a movie where like I agree with all of the criticisms we're saying. I still kind of love this movie just in its construction and its approach to the biopic. In the same way that Cabaret is Fosse trying to blow up what a movie musical is. And I do think, while not totally understanding the subject, I think the form of this movie is really interesting and is a form I wish more biopics followed rather than trying to conform people's lives to very traditional 3-act structures. But there's that scene in the script that feels like the most biopic-y scene where his manager comes backstage at the strip club and is like, I can't explain this to you, but people think what you're doing is about to be a thing. They think this is in and you're on the cusp of something. And he's like, I don't want to go back to fucking clubs. I don't want to do mother-in-law jokes. The great thing about performing at a strip club is I can say anything and no one gives a shit. And the manager being like, no, but what I think is about to change is people at traditional clubs will let you talk like you're at a strip club.
Right.
And it's that realization of he only finds his freedom as a comedian when he's accepted that he's in a place where like none of this fucking matters. This is a fucking den of depravity.
I can just talk. Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And this cultural shift of something is changing and people now maybe want to hear the tie get loosened.
Yeah. And maybe not for the better. What about this, though? You say traditional biopic structure. Unfortunately, I made sure it was an earlier movie. I just Googled it. There was another biopic that had that structure, and it was called Little Big Man, and it was 4 years before Lenny. And you know who started that?
With Hoffman.
Dustin Hoffman. Dustin Hoffman.
Arthur Penn movie. I'd never seen Little Big Man. That's like a classic revisionist Western, right? Like that's, hey, the Wild West wasn't so cool.
No, right. I saw it when it came out. I was a little kid, and that was a big hit. Lenny was not a big hit when it came out. At least people thought it was kind of disappointing, even then.
Bring, bring.
Hello?
Bring,
Click.
bring.
Sorry. Click. Hello?
Hey, Bombas's mission is simple, man. Okay, dig this. Make the most comfortable clothes ever. Match every item sold with an equal item donated. So when you buy Bombas, you are also giving to someone who's in need.
Who's this on the phone? You just launched right into it like a barrage.
Because I'm a truth teller.
Okay.
I'm telling you the truth.
Is this Lenny Bruce?
It's Lenny Bruce.
Wow. Are you here to tell me that Bombas designed their socks, shirts, and underwear to be the clothes you can't wait to put on every day?
Yeah, but the man doesn't want you to know that, man.
They don't want me to know that everything they make is soft and seamless and tagless and has a cozy feel.
Yeah, and dig this, man. There's a pair of Bombas socks for everything you do. They come in tons of options, like comfy performance styles made with sweat-wicking yarns, which makes your feet stay cool, man.
Wow.
While the rest of you works up a sweat like I do when I'm performing in rooms that look like they smell bad.
That's true, and you need very breathable clothes in a room like that. Underwear fits so well. Feel like you're wearing nothing at all in a good way.
Yeah.
Don't get too excited about that, Lenny. I know you like to work blue.
Yeah, now dig this, man. You can get blue socks, and you can let your ankles be free to soak up the sunlight, even though the cops don't like that, man.
Sure. Well, did you know socks, underwear, and t-shirts are the 3 most requested clothing items at homeless shelters?
Yeah, I did. And here's another thing. The media doesn't want you to know, man.
The Bombas donates one item for every one you buy.
No, I'm talking about the ultimate truth, the hidden truth.
What, that they've helped donate over 50 million items of essential clothing?
Nah, man, dig this. Gotta take a long drag quickly. Hold on. Bombas is the most successful product in the history of Shark Tank. Man.
Sure. Well,
I don't believe in capitalism, but Shark Tank, that's a quality program.
That's great, Lenny. If you go to bombas.com/check, you'll get 20% off your first purchase. That's bombas.com/check for 20% off. Bombas.com/check.
Better not cancel this ad, man. No, it's a little too hot, a little too dangerous, but I'm telling the truth.
Some more context on Lenny. All right. It's shot for 100 days, which is insane. Fosse claims more like 80, but no. Apparently, one thing he insisted on was the extras for the crowds. He would only let them watch 2 performances max. So they had like 2,500 extras in 1 week, and they would cycle them in and out because like Fosse was like, I need them to have authentic reactions and, like while they're shooting performances. But like, this is the thing, like as much as this is Bob Fosse making a small movie, he has the clout at this point to make demands like that, right? Like,
I mean, there was that thing, they dramatize it in Fosse Verdon, but the whole idea was like, Bob, you just got out of rehab, your health is fucked, your brain is fucked, like maybe take a break, you've had this crazy year, and he's like, no, I have to keep working, I'll tackle a small movie, it was a play, I can keep it stage bound, I can shoot it on location, and then very quickly he was like, we gotta go to Miami, it has to be real Miami, we have to go to all these clubs. We have to shoot in 3 different cities.
It's got to be interview form. We're going to cut it all up. It's going to be this whole, yes, 100%.
And is he the off-camera voice of the interviewer in this?
Is he? I don't know. I mean, that makes sense. So there's no one credited that I can find, but
Yeah,
it
I
would
always
make sense,
assumed
right?
it was. Yeah.
There's one anecdote that I think is kind of, an example of Fosse being totally right, where like while Hoffman's doing a routine, like they'd finish and Fosse would be like, faster, 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 faster. And Hoffman would be like, nobody talks like this. And after 20 takes, Hoffman does it so fast. And he's like, well, he was right. Like, that is actually what I was supposed to be doing the whole time, And when I hear that story, I'm like, Hoffman doesn't seem to get it to me. Like, if he thinks stand-up comedians like, oh, well, no one talks like this. But like, that's how people talk on stage. Like, that is part of the sort of unreality of a stand-up. Like, that's what's cool about it, that they're talking
It's
so
funny
rapidly.
that it sounds like they both didn't get different parts of it and were fighting on how to do it while both of them were sort of misunderstanding.
Look, I don't love this movie. I feel like you like it more, Griff, but you've also seen it more.
I have, and I said this in an earlier episode, but this was like when I was in high school, I saw this movie on TV, and I was sort of so blown away by the style of it, and this was the first Fosse movie I'd seen, that then I dug into him, and it's like I prefer Cabaret, All That Jazz, Star 80 greatly to this movie. I think those three films are perfect masterpieces, essentially, and this is a step below, but it always kind of holds the spot for me of like catching it on TV by accident and going like, what is this? What is this filmmaking style? This sort of Fosse, like everything's a montage,
There are things about this movie that kind of great, and it's not something I really ever feel the need to rewatch, but like it looks so good.
It looks
like the cinematography
kind of
is so incredible. And then everything
Yeah.
else you're saying, all the montage stuff, all the stuff that's obviously influenced by like Fosse watching like new wave movies and, French movies and all, like his sort of like the lingering little art influences, like the fact it just looks incredible. So it's worth something to me just aesthetically, like beyond
it's
anything
got an incredible texture. I mean, like Colin, you summed it up perfectly, which is just like if you're watching Rocket Man and it makes the Elton John song sound bad, you fundamentally failed. When I watch this movie, I have to sort of compartmentalize. I don't think this movie does a good job of arguing for Lenny Bruce's value in any way. And I do think this movie also perpetuates a lot of these things that are really irritating our culture, of what we talked about, of just like the fucking struggling, tortured, sad clown shit. But I like the filmmaking in this movie divorced from its sort of failure of the source material.
Right.
Because
Yeah.
even I found at a record store by chance last week, there is weirdly an original cast recording of the Lenny Broadway play.
That is weird.
Which is like not a thing that you feel like often exists for straight plays and not musicals. But I think because that play is like half comedy album, essentially. And it is a thing. What's his name? Gorman? The energy of that thing. And I think especially if you are watching someone who does a better evocation of being a stand-up and you are seeing it as a live audience in a theater, so you, the audience, are playing the role of Lenny's audience. The reaction that's happening or not happening is genuine and earned. You're not going to laugh unless this guy is successfully selling these jokes versus a movie like this where we're watching dramatization of audience response. There is an energy to even listening to the fucking cast recording of it where you're like, this works.
And this is how many years later? Back in 1974, it was probably worked 10 times better.
Yeah, absolutely.
You've seen thousands of comedians since then. In those days, people saw like 8 people,
Right.
The movie shot by Bruce Surtees, obviously, who's Robert Surtees' son, and Robert Surtees shot Sweet Charity. So he's bringing, but that guy becomes Clint's guy. That guy works on so many Clint Eastwood movies in the 70s and 80s. He also shot like Beverly Hills Cop. He's sort of like a big cinematographer in general. But he shot Dirty Harry, and he shot almost everything Clint directed all the way to the late 80s, basically. And he's incredible.
The sort of like high contrast, high shadow, just it always feeling like he's in a void.
Do you think that guy sat down with the director of Beverly Hills Cop and said, do you want the Detroit scenes to look a certain way and the Beverly Hills scenes? And the guy's probably like, what? I don't know.
Maybe.
Yeah, he's probably like, he'll wear a Lions jacket. What is this guy doing? Oh, Martin Brest is a good director, so.
Yeah.
The only other at one point this is very funny. Fosse's paranoia was so intense that he saw a big bearded guy on set and was like, "That's Francis Ford Coppola. You're trying to replace me." He just saw a guy who was heavy set and had a beard, and he was like, "You're getting the guy like Coppola is like lurking over his shoulder." I guess I don't know.
Francis Ford Coppola would have been.
Yeah, he might have been good. I don't know.
I mean, is this the same year?
Same year as Godfather 2, yes. And
which means it's also the same year as The Conversation. Yeah.
I mean, the Best Picture nominees this year are Godfather 2, which wins, Chinatown, The Conversation, Lenny, and The Towering Inferno, which is the sort of, the concession to big blockbuster filmmaking, I guess. But it's a strong five.
Fucking year for movies. And even though Fosse beat Coppola for director last time, they were up against each other. We've read all these interviews where he had this chip on his shoulder about the fact that he didn't win Best Picture.
Right. I mean, the director nominees are Coppola, Fosse, Polanski, and then Francois Truffaut for Day for Night, and John Cassavetes for A Woman Under the Influence. It is an astounding five. Right.
Yeah.
And obviously, Hoffman loses Best Actor to Art Carney. That's like that Murderers Row year where Pacino, Nicholson, and Hoffman lose to Art Carney for Harry and Tonto. And Albert Finney in Murder on the Orient Express is the other nominee. Yeah.
That's a little, yeah.
I've never seen Harry and Tonto, so I can't weigh in. I've never been able to, I don't know how much of a robbery that is. Have you seen Harry and Tonto?
Cat? Have you seen that movie, Colin?
No.
It's a Mazursky movie.
But it's like he's a lonely guy with a cat, right? Isn't that what it is?
Yeah, Tonto's the cat. He goes cross country. That's all I got. I don't know. Then, so Fosse shot this movie. He shot like 400,000 feet of film. It was way too much. He's jumbling up the chronology while in the edit room and all that. And he's smoking 1 million cigarettes a day. And this is, I think, an anecdote we shared on the Cabaret set. But he would forget about the cigarettes when he was smoking them, and they would burn his lips. Like people would have to take cigarettes out of his mouth because he would forget to take it out. Just all these sort of stories of his mania. Yeah.
Wouldn't he rip the filters off his cigarettes? Wasn't that another thing with him?
A lot of people used to do that. A lot of those people used to, in the 70s, people did that in the 70s all the time.
Come on, I need it straight. Why would you filter it? Right.
I used to study with Bill Hickey acting, and then he was like, so he was this great old, do you know Bill Hickey? He talked like that. He was old.
Yeah. From Prizzi's On.
Prizzi's On, yeah.
Right.
So he'd sit there in class and talk, and you do a 5-minute scene, he'd talk for an hour. But he'd always compare, if somebody's doing, the Winter's Tale, he'd compare it to, I saw, one of his friends was on Love Boat last night, and she did this scene where she entered the captain's table, and she said this. It was always, but he would smoke the whole time. And by the end of class, his clothes would be covered in ashes. But I mean, covered in ashes. And his fingers were all discolored from cigarettes.
Oh, yellow.
Cigarettes.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, he smoked all the time. He was covered in ashes every class. His hair would be covered. And we all smoked. So the whole class was smoking. But he was exceptional even then, yeah.
Smoking in class? I'm sorry. Is that what you said, Colin?
Yeah. No, everybody smoked, but he smoked more than anybody. And it's funny because I ran into this lady the other day who's in her 80s, and we were talking about Bill Hickey, and she goes, we used to have a class, she goes, in the 50s, I think it was Meisner or Bill Hickey, she goes, we would start at 11 at night in 1956 and go till 8 in the morning. And I was like, what a cool, she goes, it was so cool. Even then we knew this is a special time in New York. The class starts at 11 at night, and we'd all come in there and just hang out and do this acting class, this big acting class in the middle of the village when it was dirt cheap and, interesting.
And Ben, producer Ben, by the way, just to contextualize for you better, you probably know Bill Hickey best as Don Uncle Freddie Frederico in the Jerky Boys, the movie.
There you go.
Okay, sure.
I think, isn't he all he's in Christmas Vacation, right? He's in one of the vacations.
He's Uncle Lewis. Yes.
He's in Christmas Vacation.
Yeah. That's right.
Yeah, he is.
But Ben just heard cigarette smoking teacher, and he's like, "That's my kind of school." Is that what's going on?
Yeah.
I mean, That wasn't an option for me while I was in school, but it sounds nice.
Yeah, it was great. It was great.
As anyone who's seen All That Jazz knows, while he's making this movie, he's working on Chicago at the same time, and he has a gigantic heart attack because that's what All That Jazz is about, right? It's about working on this and Chicago at the same time and then completely cratering.
Right.
And he obviously his reaction to all of this is not like, oh man, I need to chill out. His reaction is to be insane, to hit on every nurse who comes to see him in the hospital, to only accentuate all of his vices, I guess. And he wrote in his will at this time, this is sort of a famous thing about Bob Fosse, that he would bequest $25,000 to a bunch of friends so they could go out and have a really nice dinner, which was actually in Bob Fosse's will.
Wow.
Yeah. I don't know. He's crazy. Every story about him is like, what a pain in the ass. I don't know. He seems like a completely exhausting person to know.
Exhausting is the exact word. Yes.
Yeah. This movie was a hit-ish. Nah, not really. 10 million. It grossed 11 million on a $3 million budget. I think everyone did fine. It just wasn't a cabaret-sized hit.
No, and I think it's that phenomenon we've talked about of someone following up their huge Oscar breakthrough movie with a movie that like people like. They still get the nominations, but there isn't the same excitement. Yeah. Right.
Right.
But you know what's interesting now? I'm just when you're saying a big dinner for all his friends. But the comedian, right? Like Lenny Bruce, he didn't have that many friends because you're always by yourself. So Lenny Bruce is in his clubs. He's got his agent, and that's it. So instead of having a full staff like Bob Fosse, who's just Lenny Bruce at these clubs.
It's true. There's no sense of any entourage with this guy at all.
No.
Yeah.
I also think it's telling, and a lot of it is just her performance is so excellent, but like it feels like he absolutely has a better understanding of Honey as a character than Lenny.
Absolutely.
I mean, she's called Hot Honey. She dances in strip joints. Like that's like Bob
these
Fosse.
are his kind of people.
He knows that so well. Exactly.
He knows that so well, and I think he really understands her psychology.
Yeah.
And like Perrine's just knocking it out of the fucking park, but it is that thing watching it last night where I was explaining like, oh, this is how Fosse grew up. He was doing shows like this when he was like 15. And the woman I'm dating went, oh, so that's why this movie is really more about her than him.
Yes.
Yeah. And why her stuff is so incredibly compelling in this movie.
Yeah. And I think she actually does a better job of playing the levels of the weird relationship between performer and audience, you know? Especially because she gets to jump around in time so much. But her telling the story from, present day with perspective, when you see her performance scenes, when you see her vulnerability off stage, her varying levels of control over her vices and everything, she's just like so fucking good.
She's great. She's amazing. Yeah.
I know her best from Superman. I mean, I know that's basic of me, but like she's the henchwoman. Yeah.
What's funny is she's an early example of what now happens to people, where it's like, oh, you give this incredible performance in this edgy movie, you get an Oscar nomination, and then they stick you in a franchise. And you're stuck sort of doing
in a
like
supporting role.
And she's a lot of fun in those movies, but she essentially plays like Lex Luthor's Gangsters Mall, and she does it in 3 of them.
She does 2 of them, yeah.
I'll give you another one from that era that was the same way. Beverly D'Angelo.
Yes.
Yeah, definitely.
She was. You ever see her in Coal Miner's Daughter? She was unbelievable.
Oh, yes.
She's so good in Coal Miner's Daughter. That movie is amazing. That's a great biopic. There's a good example of a great
What
biopic.
a great biopic. Oh, my God.
And Beverly D'Angelo was robbed of an Oscar nomination, in fact. She plays Patsy Cline, for anyone who hasn't seen it.
But Margot Kidder, a similar thing as well, you know?
Sure, yes. Yeah. Obviously, she got tagged with the difficult, quote-unquote reputation, yeah. But no, the thing with Valerie Perrine is, like, it's not like she doesn't work. She had a career.
Mm-hmm.
She was in stuff and eventually she's sort of like in some TV. But yeah, you would think seeing this performance like, oh, did this person go on to have like a major movie star career? And she doesn't.
No, I think Can't Stop the Music kind of hurt her a little bit too. I mean, that's some
Yeah.
years later, but that was such a radioactive flop, and I think she's got
That's the Village
one of
People
the
movie,
lead
right?
roles in that. Right? She's essentially.
I think she's the lead. If
It's her and
not counting
Gutenberg.
the Village People, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
right. Are the sort of young leads of that. Yeah, Electric Horseman, I guess, is sort of the one movie she has that's sort of at her level. I forgot she's in The Border as well.
What you guys should do, I'm sure you guys love hearing suggestions for your podcast. What you guys should do is all the movies that was so, even though the big stars, big budget studio, that were Coke. Because I always think of 1941, and when you said "Don't Stop the Music," that's another one.
Yeah,
Like
Right.
these
Just
giant
that
movies
New York. That's a classic
Right.
one.
in the middle of Coke era. You know what I mean?
Right. Where everyone is on coke. Everyone is on coke.
Rather
Yes.
than picking a director and go through all their films, we construct a miniseries where the auteur is cocaine, and it's movies that were primarily directed by cocaine.
And you could almost try to like find the people in it and find out who was the big Coke dealer at that time on the movie set. I'm sure they had one big dealer on each one of them. You know?
Oh, it's like knowing the good DPs or the good the good
Yes,
casting directors. Like, who was the dealer on this one though? Oh, well, that's why it's
Yes.
good. Oh, it was Joey. It was Joey John. Whatever. What were you gonna say, Griff?
This is sideways relevant because it's a Hoffman story. Have I ever told the Papillon Steve McQueen story on the mic?
Not that I can remember.
Okay, so my friend Barry Josephson, who's a
Mhm.
great producer, produced The Tick. He who started out representing comedians. He was Whoopi's first manager. He was working with someone who produced. No, he met Dustin Hoffman, and he was talking to Dustin Hoffman about what it was like to work with Steve McQueen on Papillon, right? And Hoffman's like a star at this point. He's like one of the most exciting young stars. But Steve McQueen has been a capital M movie star for a good period of time at this point. Has a defined movie star persona.
100%. He's 20
Right.
years into a storied career.
Right.
Yes.
And I think that's the first time that Hoffman is working with someone who is undeniably has that much more movie star Hollywood weight than he does in one of these movies, right? As the dominant lead. So Barry asked him what it was like working with McQueen, and he goes, I'll tell you what it was. McQueen was the first time that I understood what a movie star is, what really defines the amount of powers a movie star can hold, right? And he said, we filmed the whole movie on this island, and it's hard to get to, right? There are only like so many boats that go back and forth per day. We're all staying on the island because we'd lose time otherwise. And McQueen was so obsessed with racing his cars
Right.
that he demanded that they ship one of his sports cars, one of his Italian sports cars, to this island so he could do laps around the island on his off time, because it was such a vice for him that he couldn't go 2 days without fucking Terry Rubber, right? And Barry goes, wow, that's crazy. So he was such a movie star, he got them to bring the car over in a big box, paid whatever $100,000 to get the car over. And he goes, no, that's not the story. The story is that he had his mechanics pull apart the car and hide cocaine everywhere inside of it, inside of the tires, inside of the engine, inside of everything, because the customs were so extreme. I forget where it was they shot Papillon, but they couldn't find ways to successfully smuggle cocaine in. So Steve McQueen essentially had them use like a $200,000 sports car as the packaging for his cocaine.
I mean, that's impressive.
But what's not impressive is The French Connection came out 2 years earlier. It was the biggest movie in the world. And that was the whole thing. They smuggled cocaine, heroin in the car.
This fucking hack.
Well, I'm just saying, he's lucky he didn't get caught.
Yes,
Wasn't that hard to
absolutely.
figure out?
Right. It's lucky no one was like, hey, remember that movie French Connection, though?
Remember, it was in the panels of the car?
Yes.
Yes.
I just think it's crazy that he really did that.
But honestly, cocaine in those days, they would have been like, it's only cocaine.
Right.
If it was
Right, who
weed, he would have
cares?
gotten more trouble.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, that was Popeye famously also. They're filming on Malta, and they'd get shipments of what they had been told, the studio had been told were camera equipment, and they'd open up the crates, and it would just be cocaine. It was just Bob
Oh,
Evans
yeah.
shipping crates of cocaine to Malta. Another movie that is primarily directed by cocaine, co-directed by Robert Altman, but cocaine is really the auteur of Popeye.
Yeah, all 80, I would say 80 to 82, there was a lot of
Sure.
big movie disasters from Coke, just bad movies.
Yeah.
And Coke ruined them, man.
Okay. Are there any scenes we're not talking about?
There's the moment where he's making the argument to his lawyer that they need to allow him to do his entire routine in court.
Yes.
Right.
And the lady I'm dating said, like, oh, is that where this movie's going? Is that really where the plot's heading? Like, she
Right,
was sort
like
of
a big
preconditioned to expect the
final-
biopic. Right.
Right.
This is
He
going to be
does
the
a
final
concert
20
for a
minute
judge,
performance.
And the judge
Right.
is like, starts
Right.
clapping slowly.
And instead, there you got the scene, which I think is maybe Hoffman's best scene, where he's arguing with the judge to let him do it.
Yes, I agree. He was funny in that scene.
He's funny in that
Yes.
scene.
Yes.
And then you pretty much hard cut from that scene to dead body on the bathroom and interviewing everyone about how he ended up that way.
Is that the scene where the jury is laughing? There's the shot where the camera pans over the jury, and they're
That's
not like laughing
earlier.
hysterically,
Yes.
but they're smirking. Right? Yeah. Okay, that's a little earlier.
And
Right,
that
yeah,
is
yeah.
ultimately the thing that got Lenny off, right? Was they were able to prove this has entertainment value because the jury's laughing. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
There's another moment, just a sort of Fosse construction thing that I love in this movie, which is, what is it? You go from they're sort of having their relationship arguments, right? It's after the threesome scene, which is one of the least sexy sex scenes ever committed to film. It is
That's
just
right.
so bleak and depressing. And then immediately, it's like you have that run of Valerie Perrine in interview saying, when you're on dope, you're a different person. You do things, ideas that wouldn't even come into your head otherwise. And then it cuts to him trying to talk her into the threesome against her will. Then the threesome, which is so depressing. And then him yelling at her for the fact that she was too into the threesome. Right?
Right.
Which I think is kind of like an incredible run of the movie. And then he sort of settles the argument by saying, like, well, we should have a kid. And then you hard cut to them at the Chinese food restaurant with the kid,
Right.
sucking on the
Right.
ribs, yelling, her zonked
Right.
out, showing up late, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, the stuff with the kid really got to me. I can't handle that anymore. Like, I can't handle neglect of children. Go ahead.
The
Yeah.
cut to me that's brilliant is you cut from him saying we should have a kid to the kid acting up, her showing up late, and then there's another cut to him in the booth at the same restaurant, and you realize we're seeing his memory of the last time he was here. And then when he goes to pick up the takeout, the guy says, like, your wife's very beautiful. And he goes, we're divorced. And you've skipped over
Right.
like 3 life stages and 2 cuts.
Right.
Like, the construction of that is really cool to me.
It is cool. That's everything that's most interesting about this movie. And the thing that is least interesting, fairly or unfairly,
Yes.
is Lenny Bruce, proselytizing.
Right.
I was watching it with my wife, and she was like, I guess, she kept saying the thing that we've been saying. It's like, I guess this was different, or like, I guess this was unheard of at the time, right? Like, that's how you sort of just explain it away. Yeah.
It was still unfairly done. Unfairly. I'm voting unfairly.
Vote unfair. But
That scene
yes.
though, when the kid is with him and the honey is on the phone saying, like, you got to do this, and he's ignoring her. I was really, my skin was crawling watching that, which is just a personal thing now. I just can't handle it anymore.
I met her a couple of times. Kitty
Really?
Bruce.
Yeah.
Yeah, back
Yeah.
in the 80s. And I was like, she was really nice. Backstage at Bleecker Street, at this theater on Bleecker Street, they used to do comedy night,
Mhm.
And I was like, I go to one time, I go, your father was the and I could see her face was like, oh, shut the fuck up. I've heard this
Right.
from
Who
everybody.
cares?
I basically was like, blah, 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 blah. And she was like, oh, God, another asshole.
But she
I can't say she was wrong.
she after he died got George Pataki to overturn the
Well,
obscenity
Honey
charge.
did. Honey did, right?
Honey did.
Not-
Yeah,
not
sorry.
Kitty. Yeah,
Not
Kitty.
Kitty. Sorry. Yes.
Yeah, Honey.
George
successfully
Pataki?
robbed-
Yes.
George Pataki. As
What year was
governor of
that?
New York, 2003. Colin. That's how long it took. Pardoned him,
obscenity,
I guess, for
Yeah.
the obscenity thing. Yes. And I mean, Honey lived until 2005. She lived to the age of 78.
Died in Hawaii.
Moved to
her
Hawaii.
favorite place.
Yeah, moved to Hawaii.
That's a fun sequence too, when he goes to visit her in jail, and you have that reverse shot of the 3 female convicts in their sort of skirt uniforms at the respective windows, and he's showing her
It's
the
great.
album. Yeah, they're
Yeah.
just things in this I love, but it also is like, it feels in so many ways like a dry run with technique and structure to what he's going to do in All That Jazz. And in All That Jazz,
Right.
he has a protagonist who he completely understands because it's himself.
Right.
He understands this guy's art form. He understands how to show that this guy's good at what he does.
That's the thing. He understands
Right.
the art form and All That Jazz so perfectly.
Yeah.
And like, it's actually fascinating in All That Jazz when you see him staring at, the fake Lenny movie.
Yes.
And it almost seems exhausting, like even to watch it as a movie within a movie. You're sort of like, Jesus, this guy keeps fucking yelling.
Well, and this movie is
how much of this can I
romanticizing
be?
him without being able to actually express what was interesting about him. I mean, Roger Ebert had
Right.
like his review at the time was like, I don't think anyone who isn't already a fan of Lenny Bruce will come out of this movie having any sense of his value as a performer of what he did. Right.
Right.
It's just as a political figure. Like, this movie almost treats him like Nelson Mandela. And the difference is that, like, in All That Jazz, he understands the guy better because it's him, but he also isn't deifying him. He's trying to pull the guy apart because he hates himself.
Right.
But yeah, he gets to sort of dry run a lot of the like fever dream, death rattle feeling of this movie into All That Jazz, where he perfects it.
Yeah, this movie almost is too stately in a way. Like, not in a like. It's just because it's so beautiful to look at. Almost like it doesn't have that kind of raw, energy that maybe it needs to really convince you of like this guy is hanging by a thread or whatever. It does sometimes in the court scenes, but less the stage stuff is just so well photographed, and so does that make sense?
Yeah, I think another part of it is maybe why Hoffman's better in the court scenes is because that's the environment where him playing desperation is correct.
Yeah, and he suddenly feels small, and he
Yes.
feels a little powerless, and you're more on his side, because of it and all that. It's just, I don't know. Maybe it's also just I'm conditioned when I want him on stage to be blowing me away.
Yeah.
Even with all the context I know, like, yeah.
Of course you. Why wouldn't you? If I go to see, any movie about a musician,
Yeah.
I'm conditioned to want their voice to sound good.
Right.
They use they won't even use actor's voice because
Right.
they're like, no, it's not going to sound good. The music scenes are important to this movie. The music has to be good. That's what conveying to the audience. So we have to use the real person and dub them whether they like it or not. I mean, this is insane. It drives me nuts.
Colin, you didn't like that piss joke? You didn't think
What's
the
that?
piss joke didn't land for you?
You didn't like him saying the N-word
Oh.
20 times?
Boy.
But even that scene, it's like the way he did it was like, I really got you mad. You wanted it, and it's just like, it was just, there was no life to it. There's no humor. You just got to make it funny. I don't know. I mean, I feel like Lenny Bruce got a short shrift.
Colin, my question for you, do you think Pacino would have done this better than Hoffman? / do you think there's any star of this moment who could have pulled it off? I guess the obvious answer is you do it with the guy who already proved he could do it on Broadway. That's the answer, but they were never going to bankroll it with him.
Yeah, but I mean, I mean, I think that, people, when I read stuff about Lenny Bruce years ago, they used to always say he had that, like, Catskills rhythm to him, too.
Yeah.
So to leave all that out, like it was Catskills combined with Jazz Club, you know what I mean? So, like, that was his, when he'd come on stage, so the crowd's, like, with him because he was funny for the first 15 years, last few years he was on heroin. But, so it's like, I mean, Pacino probably would have been better, but I would have said go with Cliff Corman, but I mean, Pacino probably would have been better. He seems like he would have been, but
But is Al Pacino that funny?
he was funny in Scarface.
He is funny in Scarface.
He is funny in Scarface.
You know what?
Funny in Heat,
Pacino gets
obviously.
funnier later.
Yeah. And I mean, and so did De Niro. We all saw The Comedian.
Right. Well, yes, of course. We talk about the great movies that capture being a stand-up. Robert De Niro as the comedian is the high water mark.
By the way,
Yeah.
another example of guys up there basically doing like this crude stuff and being like, hey, the crowd freaked out. It's like the crowd freaked out because you were just like grabbing your cat, whatever it was.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
it's all like, I'm all for transgression accidentally. You know what I mean? But it's not like trying to just be provocative like an 8-year-old kid. You know what I mean?
David,
Yep.
Mubi.
Mm-hmm.
If you listen to the show, you know about Mubi.
Yeah, that's right. You know, it's a curated streaming service showing exceptional films from around the globe.
They're a frequent sponsor on the show.
Yeah, you know, every day they premiere a new film, iconic directors, emerging auteurs, something always to discover. Every film's hand selected, but there's something else.
Because usually we recommend the things that are on Mubi right now, sometimes with the aid of some sort of vaguely anthropomorphized animal. But today, we want to do a little plug for Mubi's acclaimed audio documentary series, the Movie Podcast, which is returning this summer for its second season.
Yes, this time its focus is on movie theaters because in a time when too many cinemas are shutting down, we think it's time to lift them up.
Absolutely.
So it's called Only in Theaters, and the season's going to tell you some surprising stories of individual movie theaters that had a huge impact on film history, and in some cases, history in general.
So here's some of the examples, right? Story of the Cinémathèque Française, which inspired a generation of filmmakers around the world to such a degree that when its founder was briefly fired, it led to demonstrations in the streets of Paris. He also won an honorary Academy Award.
Yeah, he did. Yeah.
One of the few people who did not work in the film industry proper. I mean, he was like smuggling film canisters out during World War II to make sure the Nazis didn't burn them.
Well, don't burn all their episodes.
Well, I'm sorry. Look, here's some other
Jeez.
stories, okay?
Well, just do one more.
The story of the Westgate, an unassuming second-run theater in suburban Minnesota that arguably turned Harold and Maude from a total flop into one of the most beloved movies of the 20th century.
Here's some featured guests.
Yeah.
Barbet Schroeder.
Good director.
Mary Harron.
Good
Great
director.
director. Peter Strickland.
Good
Shout
director.
out. Nick Broomfield. And Alejandro Jodorowsky himself. And you got Jay Hoberman, Amy Nicholson, friend of the show, Louis Manon, lots of people to add insight and commentary. It's a great show, so listen to that. And you can try Mubi free for 30 days at mubi.com/check. That's mubi.com/check for a whole month of great cinema for free. That's it.
Movie. What? So the Oscar winners that year are. We
The
went
Godfather
through
Part
here.
2.
Right. Coppola wins
Is Best
director.
Picture. Coppola wins director. Ellen Burstyn wins Best Actress for Alice, which is a great movie. Best Actor is Art Carney, like I
Right.
said.
Who wins the supportings?
Supporting actor goes to Robert De Niro for The Godfather Part 2. Pretty great performance.
Yeah.
And
yes.
Ingrid Bergman for Murder on the Orient Express, which is
right.
a little bit of a sort of like, oh, you're a legend. Like, thanks for giving us one more performance. Right? It's her last win.
She is very good in that
She's
movie.
very good in
but
that.
that is a
She is.
performance that out of context, you're like, are you really going to give her the Oscar for that? They
Right,
just
she-
lost their fucking minds for the fact where it's like, she's not wearing makeup.
Right.
she's doing an
She's
accent.
old.
Right.
She beats like Talia Shire in Godfather 2. She beats Madeline Kahn in Blazing Saddles, which is a great nomination.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but yeah, so obviously this is the height of new Hollywood. It's such an exciting time for cinema. Amarcord wins Best Foreign Film. You know, what are some other movies? Obviously Chinatown, The Conversation. These are big movies of that year. Young Frankenstein, Day for Night. Like I mean, you know, it's a good year.
It's a huge
Howard Hawks won an honorary award, and so did Jean Renoir. Sounds like a good Oscars, honestly. And this movie came out, well, premiered in November, but it really comes out in December.
Okay.
That's the weekend I'm giving you, late December 1974, where Lenny is opening number 6 at the box office. So it's not in the top 5.
Okay. But that is even insane to think about.
That it opened at number 6?
Yeah.
I think it, you know, Hoffman is a big deal.
No, I know. I'm just saying, could you imagine a movie like this opening at number 6 today? Under any circumstances, even if it starred fucking Channing Tatum as Lenny Bruce.
You're right. Number 1 at the box office. And Colin, we're guessing the top 5 of the box office from the week this came out, just so we can.
Oh,
I'm gonna give number 1. It's a big hit. It's been out for months and months and months. It's a thriller. It's a crime thriller. Kind of a cultural movie. Yes.
Do you think you know what it is?
Clute.
It is not Clute. Although
He leaned
Clute
all the way into his screen when he said that.
It is a far worse movie than Clute.
It's
is
a
not
far
a
worse
particularly.
movie than Clute.
It's. I suppose it's an effective. It spawned many sequels.
Okay. It's not a Dirty Harry movie?
No, but that's the vibe.
Is it Death Wish?
It's Death Wish. It's Charles Bronson's Death Wish.
Yeah.
What do you think of Death Wish, Colin?
Love it.
Yeah.
Love Death Wish.
He's shooting people.
I loved Death. The rest of them I didn't like, but the original was. Although I'll admit, Death Wish when he goes to Arizona in the middle of the movie is very strange.
Yes, he goes to that's where he gets his guns, right, or whatever. Yeah.
It's and Stuart Margolin plays a guy from the West, from Love American Style. Stuart Margolin does not look like that Western guy, and but yeah, well, I'm a sucker. Anytime I see New York in the '70s, I'm gonna be predisposed.
That's the thing,
right? Like any movie shot in New York between like 1965 and 1983 has that as a special effect, which is just you're capturing New York City in the background. Yeah.
That poster where he's in Central Park or whatever.
Right.
Yeah. All right, number 2 at the box office. One of the biggest hits of the year, disaster movie. Not the Towering Inferno.
It's not Towering Inferno. Is it Poseidon Adventure?
No.
Is it Earthquake?
It's Earthquake.
Okay. Who's the lineup in Earthquake again?
Charlton Heston, Ava Gardner, George Kennedy, Lorne Green. That's your big 4.
Got it.
Never seen Earthquake.
Me neither. Weird group.
It had the thing, right, where they had like surround sound, early surround sound. That was its big gimmick.
Sure. Yes.
That you would feel like the earthquake was happening all around you.
Co-written by Mario Puzo.
Yes. Yeah. Well, he was
he got his fucking paychecks after Godfather.
Exactly.
Oh yeah.
Number 3 at the box office is a film we mentioned that Bob Fosse worked on.
Not Little Prince, is it?
It is Little Prince.
Really?
What?
Yes.
I thought
Little
that was a big
Prince.
flop. Yeah.
It was a big flop, but it's in the box. It just came out and it's hanging around. I've never seen it.
I just want to say, because I hadn't made this connection before, but JJ pulled up some quotes in the research dossier that linked this up. A lot of people think that Michael Jackson's sort of solo career dance style, including the moonwalk, come from Bob Fosse's performance in The Little Prince.
That's interesting.
Oh.
Well,
There's a similarity there that I didn't realize.
He was influenced by Bob Fosse, yeah.
Absolutely, yeah.
I mean, if there was one movie he might be interested in watching, it sounds like it was that one.
Absolutely, and Bob Fosse's sort of doing the jazzy Lizard King thing.
Number 4, I'm gonna get.
You're gonna get 4, okay.
Number 4, one of the biggest hits in 1974. It's a sequel. It's part of a sort of.
Bye Bye Braverman.
It's not Bye Bye Braverman.
Which, of course, was a sequel to Hi Hi Braverman.
No, it was a sequel to Bye Bye Birdie, right?
Yeah, sure.
It's a sequel. It's part of like a franchise. It's one of those things that you're like, that was huge in the 70s and now it's forgotten.
Is it an airport movie?
Nope.
Huh.
That was a good guess.
Thank you. Okay, forgotten.
I can give you a genre.
Is it a Billy Jack movie?
It's a Billy Jack movie.
Okay.
Born Losers.
Is it?
It's not Born Losers, which is the first Billy Jack movie.
Oh yeah.
Is the second one just called Billy Jack, or is it Billy Jack Goes to
Correct.
Washington?
No, the second one is called Billy Jack. The third one is this one. Billy Jack Goes to Washington is the 5th one.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Billy Jack. I can't believe I don't know this. I should know this. I was there.
Give us a sort of title structure. What is Billy Jack? Are we describing an activity that he does this
Something's
time?
happening to him.
Something happens. Love finds Billy Jack. Billy Jack goes bananas.
No. I mean, I think he's always going bananas, but no. God, this movie is 3 hours long.
Oh!
It must be unwatchable.
I think I know the answer. Is it The Trial of Billy Jack?
It's The Trial of Billy Jack. That's right.
I don't remember that.
Colin, have you seen these movies? I've never seen a Billy Jack.
I saw them when they came out.
I only know them as like pop culture footnotes. Like I've never,
No, Billy Jack was the so you talk about that was along with the Dustin Hoffman Little Big Man. Billy Jack was the revenge of Native Americans, basically on for all the westerns of the old days.
But also so fascinating because they were like these outsider films. Like they were made independently outside of the studio system.
Tom Laughlin had no charisma.
No,
And he was
and
the
he
star of
just
every movie.
like willed himself into being a movie star and made a franchise out of it. And they were so huge.
Yes, he did. Yeah, it was crazy. It was crazy. Even at the time, people were like, who the hell is Tom Laughlin?
Yeah, he later founded a Montessori school and then ran for president 3 times.
What? He founded a Montessori school and what?
He
Ran for
founded
president.
a Montessori school and ran for president in 92, 2004, and 2008.
I love it. He probably taught martial arts Montessori style.
He
Exactly.
received 154 votes in the New Hampshire primary against George W. Bush.
Well,
Oh,
all right.
everybody used to quote him when I was a kid. When I see this, I just go berserk.
Right. That was
That was
his
a big
thing.
quote back when I was a kid.
Yeah.
Billy Jack. Okay, number 5 at the box office is probably not a movie you're going to get, Griff. It has a very chilling title. It is a Southern set crime drama. All right,
That's a
best. No,
very
here's
chilling
the
title.
clue.
I know what it's called.
What's it called?
Harlan County.
It's not that. No, it's not that good.
Making county line.
It's not Making County Line. That's yeah. No, I think that movie's come up before, hasn't it, Griff?
Almost definitely. Yeah.
Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
It's not Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It's okay. Here's the thing.
Yeah.
It is the screen debut of O.J. Simpson.
Fuck.
It has 2 titles. It had 2 different titles. It also stars Lee Marvin and Richard Burton, if that helps.
Yes,
It's-
like Klansman.
There you go. It's called
Okay.
Klansman.
Wow.
It also had the alternate title of Burning Cross. It's like a racist murder in the South movie.
Yes, I saw it. I saw it as Klansman. I saw it.
Yes. So that's it. But the O.J. Simpson thing, I feel like that's the biggest fact about it.
That's right.
God. Directed by Terrence Young, written by Sam Fuller.
Correct.
Sam Fuller.
Made many James Bond movies. Other
Yeah.
movies in the top 10, Griff. Lenny, The Godfather Part 2, The Longest Yard, The Taking of Pelham 1, 2, 3, and Airport 1975. Like 5 other movies are just huge, big old movies
Yeah.
from the year.
Yes.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's also funny that like Godfather Part 2 was a box office disappointment relative to Godfather Part 1. Like was still a big hit, but it was like a major drop off.
It made a lot less money than the first one. It's true. Yeah. But then,
was
it
like-
had a
yeah.
long life.
The rule of thumb for so long was a sequel will make 50% of what the last one made. And
At
now
best.
almost every sequel grows over the last film, the previous film.
Right. But yeah, so it's a hot year for movies, I would
Mhm.
say. Taking Pelham 1, 2, 3. That's one of my favorite movies, obviously. Discussed many times on this show. Fosse, this is his little stopover in between 2 masterpieces. It's a pretty good movie. That's my take on Lenny. And that's it. That's all I got for you.
That's it. All right, guys.
That's it.
Well, if we ever do cop show again,
Oh.
your character Griff has to be obsessed with death.
Great. I'm going through my Lenny Bruce phase. But it's a great thing. Did what, like 30 episodes overall eventually?
There's like 3
Yeah, like
seasons of it,
24
right?
episodes. Yeah.
24. But it was for people who haven't seen it, it was like a mockumentary about Colin trying to make his own Law and Order style cop show, looking for the Richard Belzer crossover. And I play a megalomaniac NYU graduate who's been hired on for director and is trying to fight for control as auteur. And every episode just has a bananas guest star. I mean, it was like Seinfeld and Amy Schumer and Steve Buscemi and Michael Che, Danny Aiello. You got such incredible people in on that.
Yeah.
Gaffigan. I'm trying. The list goes
It's so
on and
fun.
on.
And
on
J.D.
and on.
Amato worked on it, right?
J.D.
Friend of the
Amato
show.
was the director.
Yeah,
Yes.
director.
Yes, our good friend. Yes.
Yeah.
I highly recommend people watch it. And people should watch. Several of your shows are on Netflix now.
They should watch. Just watch New York Story.
That's my favorite. I am biased because I'm a New Yorker, but it is just like you breaking down the sort of the semiotics of New York City. This like anthropological
yeah.
study of how we all coexist with each other. That is just like so dead. I saw it like 3 times, Colin.
Thanks.
It was so great, and I'm always excited to see what you do next. I mean, we were talking about this right before we were recording. You're working on new stuff, but it is that thing with you where I feel like you are able to make really trenchant observations, but you also are funny. Like, you are not self-indulgent. You can make these larger shows that have larger themes and ideas and observations and everything, but there's also a joke every 15 seconds that is earned.
Thanks, yeah, because that's a good thing about working at the clubs too, because I work those shows out in the club, and then but you can't lose them. Like you said, they're drinking. They'll space out. You have to keep them by being joke. So it's good training, you know.
Yeah, and I don't mean to damage your reputation and destroy your carefully honed persona by saying this on mic, but you truly are one of the nicest people I've ever worked with in show business.
Nah, same to you, same back.
You are such a gentleman and such a kind, supportive person. I really appreciate you doing the podcast.
No, you're amazing. People still bring it up all the time. They always go, "Who's that director?" Well, they know you from the tick, but they're like, "That guy's amazing." They loved you so much. You were so brilliant on that show.
It's such a fun show.
Damn it.
Yeah.
All right.
We'll revive it.
Take
at some point.
Take us out, Griff. Take us out.
Thank you all for listening. Please remember to rate, review, and subscribe. Thank you to Marie Barty for our social media and helping produce the show. AJ McKeon and Alex Barron for editing. Thank you to JJ Birch for our research, Joe Bone, Pat Reynolds for our artwork, Lane Montgomery and the Great American Novel for our theme song. You can go to blankcheckpod.com for links to real nerdy shit, including our Patreon, Blank Check special features, where we are doing franchises, and we're getting ready to go through the Roger Moore Bond movies. Speaking of Terrence Young, did he do any of the Moores, or did he only do Connerys?
No, I think he did like Dr. No and From Russia with Love and Thunderball. Yeah, he only did Connerys. Yeah.
But check that out. Colin, thank you again for coming on.
Thanks for having me. Good to see you. Thanks, David.
Gentleman and a scholar. Tune in next week for... I'm just going to say it, right?
Yeah. Say it. You won't jinx it.
Tune in next week for All That Jazz with special guest Lin-Manuel Miranda.
Yeah, excited to do that one.
Yeah. And when I texted Colin to ask him to do this, I said, please do us this favor because the ratings are going to crash the episode after yours. We need someone big to come on and talk about Lenny. That episode's already a write-off for us. We can't sell any advertising on that one. No one wants to touch it. And as always, I'm not shitting you. Next week, Lin-Manuel Miranda is going to be on this podcast.